The camera I use most of the time is this Mamiya 7, and the lens I always use with it is this 65mm. There were 3 other lenses released with this camera, a 43mm, an 80mm and a 150mm. And I have one of these, it's this, the 150mm. I never really use it much though, and that's because the 65mm is a wide-angle lens, which makes it a great all-purpose lens, whereas the 150mm is much more zoomed in if you like, and you'd really only use it for specific applications, like portraiture. And there's also the fact that changing lenses on the Mamiya 7 is a bit of a hassle, to be honest. So basically I just keep the 65mm on the camera all the time, and if the lens is ever too wide angle for my subject, I can always just crop the image later. I'll show you what I mean though about changing lenses being a hassle. So this camera has a leaf shutter, which means the shutter is in the lens, and that means that you can't just take the lens right off, because any film on the camera would just instantly become completely exposed to the light. So to prevent this from happening, there's this control on the bottom of the camera, which draws a curtain across the film to protect it from light. And only after you do this, can you then press the lens release button, remove the lens, change the lens, and then you can reset the curtain with this button to start taking pictures again. So it is a bit inconvenient. I want to give this lens more of a chance though, and see if I can get used to using it. So today I'm going to be comparing these 2 lenses in an application that should favour the 150mm. So I'll be meeting up with my cousin for a walk around London to take some portraits, and this focal length should be very good for that. My cousin wants to do some architectural photography, by the way, so I'll be lending her my Nikon F3 with a 28mm lens. So let's try it out. Another photo. One looking at me, yeah. You in focus? Very nice. Snap back a bit. Okay, so there are two main reasons the 150mm is said to be better for portraits than the 65mm. The first reason is that it's a more flattering perspective for portraits. You've probably seen videos like this, which demonstrate just how different subjects can look through lenses of different focal length, and something around 80mm on full frame, or 150mm for medium format, is said to be the most pleasing for close-up portraits, and gives you the least distortion. So this lens did allow me to take some nice close-up portraits, which I wouldn't usually do with the 65mm, and some of them did turn out quite nicely, I think. The second reason the 150mm should be better for portraits is that you should get more separation between the subject and background. You get a smaller depth of field with a longer focal length, so the background will appear more blurred. If I now compare photos taken with each of the lenses, you can see how much more blurred the background seems on the 150mm, despite both pics being taken at f8. And having a really blurred background does give this portrait a nice effect. The downside of this, though, is that the focusing of your lens does have to be more precise, and using this lens I actually took quite a few pictures that were out of focus. I'm sure this wasn't my fault though. I think unfortunately this lens is just more sensitive to a slight misalignment in my camera's rangefinder. I've been using this camera since 2015, and I think it might finally be time now to get the rangefinder calibrated. So in conclusion, it really comes down to personal preference. Some reasonably nice pictures taken with both lenses. You can reproduce more actual detail in a person's face with the 150mm, while with the 65mm you see the subject in context, and there's a lot more freedom to crop the image how you like. And generally I do still prefer the 65mm. I'll now talk about the experience I had using the lens. There were a couple of ergonomic issues. Firstly, the finder. The camera automatically changes the frame lines in the finder to match the focal length of the lens on the camera. This is what the frame lines for the 65mm lens look like. The 80mm, you can see the frame gets a little bit smaller as the focal length of the lens gets longer. And the 150mm. You can see just how much smaller the frame becomes, which does make composing your image much more difficult, which is bad for close-up portraits because your subject will probably be filling up most of the frame, and so you can't really correct your composition later with cropping. There is an external finder you can get for the 150mm lens, so perhaps that's worth trying. It is pretty expensive though, it actually costs around the same as the lens. The second issue was the lens's minimum focusing distance, 1.8 meters versus the 1 meter of the 65mm lens, and I did find myself having to step backwards occasionally to ensure I was within the 150mm lens's minimum focusing distance. This is probably something you'd get used to though. Finally, focusing just takes a little bit longer with the 150mm. From minimum distance to infinity on the 65mm is this. From minimum distance to infinity on the 150mm is this. And while this means more precision, just the extra time to rotate the lens is a little bit annoying if you're used to the 65mm. So I think for the moment I'll be sticking to my 65mm lens, but I will keep the 150mm around just for close-up portraits. Some of the pictures it produced were very nice, and I think in time I'll get used to most of the limitations I was talking about. It's also great value. It cost around a quarter of the price of the 65mm. But that's about it for now. I've got some interesting camera projects coming soon, so subscribe if that's something you're interested in. And for now, thanks for watching, and see you next time.